Hello, everyone. Pastor Brandon here. Hope this finds you doing well today. Looks like a little sunshine, a little outside, and it was a little cloudy this morning, but it's kind of looked like it's kind of broke. But hopefully everyone had a pleasant Resurrection Sunday, and hopefully you were able to spend some time with your family and just had a good time on Sunday. So today we're going to unpack a few verses. So we're going to be in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 11, starting in verse 28 through 30. And this is what the word of the Lord says. It says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." And so, when you kind of look at these verses, we live in a world and a society that just seems like it just is never stop demanding things. And, whether it's deadlines or we got to meet obligations or burdens or, we feel that a lot of times we carry those things alone. And it gets to a point sometimes that weight that we feel just it seems that it just accumulates, and then it gets to a point that it feels like it's a crushing weight. And so, a lot of times what we hear when we have these moments, we tell, we hear or tell people a lot, push harder, try harder, become more, be more kind of thing, and just push through, and you'll make it on the other side. And but what Jesus is saying here is kind of a little bit different from what we against the grain of all that, and what we normally see or say. And so it's a thing of as we get to verse 28, right before this, in verse 27, we see that Jesus says, "All things have been handed over to me by my Father. And no one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son chooses to reveal him." And so, so he's already in verse 27. He's talking about having divine authority, and rather of just commanding the crowds with that authority, he stops and he calls them to him. And so, the one who holds all things together extends his hands to those who have really, at this time, we'll discuss it here in just a minute, they had nothing really left. They were tapped out in a sense. And, the people that Jesus was addressing, were experiencing some exhaustion, and the religious burden of the first century Judaism had become a crushing weight of legal observance. And your religious leaders of the time were ones that were the rabbis, the Pharisees. They made things just really unbearable. And it's not in a sense of understand this is not that it was because of God's law that was crushing them. It was the fact of what they had added to it. So that you had these human additions to the law that just made things just unbearable for the people. And so these folks were spiritually just depleted and straining under a religion that left them breathless. And again, just spiritually depleted. And I would say that at some point all of us have experienced at some point this spiritual depletion and just that weight, of that crushing weight. But what does Jesus say in verse 28? "Come to me." And he doesn't tell them to clean it. Come to me when you have yourself cleaned up, or come to me when you're in the right spot, you have things all lined out. No, he tells them to come, and he describes them too when he and we'll get in that here in just a second. But it's a thing. They were weary and they were depleted, and they were struggling And with that, Jesus tells them to come. And so he gives them this open, at the beginning of verse 28, he gives them this open invitation to come to him. And it's, is a thing of, it wasn't just a one-time thing. It was a thing of come to me, and a invitation for them to come to him. And so we're described. There's two kind of groups here that's described that he's referring to, or that he addresses, and it says all who labor and are heavy laden. So all who labor and are heavy laden. So labor refers to a toil that produces weariness, kind of fatigue that comes from an effort, under strain. So labor, and then he heavy laden, and this indicates a burden that has been placed upon someone and remains pressing down on them. So labor and heavy laden, and so he invites them to come to him with those things. And so Jesus, together you take those things. Jesus is describing people who've been working hard under a load that isn't theirs alone to bear. And so he, and that maybe why he presses both of them together, describes both of them together. But it's a those who labor and those who are heavy laden. And sometimes we feel like we have labored and we are heavy laden, and so he tells them to come to him. And what's he finish verse 28 with? And I will give you rest. Man, how many times have we been so labored and so heavy laden that, just that sense of just that rest that we need, and we treasure too, that rest. And that's what he promised, I will give you rest. It's a rest that's not earned. It's not a rest that is achieved through a spiritual discipline, but it is a rest that is given, a gift from the one who holds, as it described in, again, verse 27, all authority. That rest that he gives. It's not a rest that, that we earn or achieve through things. It's a rest that he has promised us when we come to him. I will give you rest. So Jesus is not merely just offering comfort. He's identifying himself with the Lord, with God, who makes a promise. And so, again, come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And then he goes on in verse 29 and says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. And so again, it's that, he tells them in verse 29, take my yoke upon you. Now, if you know anything about what a yoke actually is, you might be thinking, a yoke is a burden. A yoke is a thing of a burden. It's a thing that is a weight that is used, and it's like, how can he say, take my yoke upon you, after he just said, come and I'll give you rest? And so it's so how does he promise that, something like that to be taken up? And, that the answer really is what a yoke actually does. And so in the ancient world, and even some today, a yoke was a wooden frame laid across the necks of two animals so they could pull together. And so it was a thing of the yoke didn't necessarily multiply a load, it distributed that load. So instead of one having all the weight, it was distributed between two had the weight. And so, one couldn't bear it all alone, so, two shared it. So Jesus is saying, my yoke is different from the ones that you have been handed. And so the Pharisees loaded burdens and kind of, walked away, but Jesus invites the weary to share a yoke with him. And so that yoke, that burden, that heavy laden, that labor that he's talking of in verse 28, he's saying, take this yoke, my yoke, upon you, and let me help you and share with the burden. And so that's why he says, take my yoke upon you. Learn from me. Let me help you distribute this weight, this labor, this heavy laden, this spiritual depletion, and let me help you. And he goes on and says, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest. Again, that rest for your souls. And so, Jesus here, as he says, I'm gentle and lowly in heart, it's a self-description that Jesus is describing himself. And of one that has all the power, all the authority, all the glory is all his, he describes himself as gentle and lowly at heart. And, and then of course, you'll find rest for your soul. So this rest is not something that's circumstantial. It's found in the posture of the soul rightly oriented with Christ. And so, so what's the difference between the rest the world offers and the soul rest that Christ describes here? The world offers things that, rest, comfort, achievement, success, maybe you could throw in distraction if you wanted to, that kind of rest of things. But what Jesus is talking about here is the fact that we can find true rest in Him and only Him. And that true rest, that peace that surpasses all understanding, that just, that is spiritually for our souls. And that's what he's describing here. And, but it's a thing of, we see these, and I want you to understand that it's not a thing that, as we read these, that we shouldn't see this and take it naively, but it's the fact that, of understanding that Jesus never promises that following him is effortless. And so, don't think coming to him, and I think a lot of people do, thinking that they come to Christ and there's not going to be any struggle, there's not going to be anything they're going to have to deal with, there's not going to be, any hardship or anything. You just come to him and everything's fine. That's not what he's talking about here. And, he called his disciples to take up their crosses in chapter 16. So the point here is not the absence of difficulty, but the nature of the load. A burden born in the fellowship with Christ aligns with his purposes, carried in his strength. It's a very different thing than what the world offers of grinding of self-justification or religious performance or striving to earn what can only be received. And so as he describes his yoke, the yoke of Christ is light because it is the only load that comes with the one who made us carry it alongside us. And so that's what makes it light, is the fact that he is with us, he's sharing it with us, he's taking it, he's distributing that weight as that yoke describes, and he's alongside with us. I think sometimes we sit and, of course, verse 30, for my yoke is easy, my burden is light. It goes back to the fact that he's with us, alongside us the whole way. Even when we sometimes don't feel that way or see what he's doing, but he's with us every step. And so we have to understand that the things that we deal with and go through when we are spiritually depleted, we feel burdened, or, again, labor and heavy laden, we feel those things. He's taking, if we rely on him and come take his yoke and let him distribute that weight, all those things, he's right there with us. He never leaves us alone as believers. And so, the whole thing, as you reflect on the whole passage, the 3 verses, it's the thing, an invitation, the shared yoke he talks about, him describing himself as gentle and lowly in heart. The burden is light. His yoke is easy. His burden is light. What is the single thing Jesus most wants you to receive from these words? And I would hope it would be encouragement to understand that He is with us every step of the way, and that His yoke is light. The question is, what would it look like to actually come to Him this week and understand and lay these things at His feet of, I need your help? What would that look like in your own spiritual life? And, just think about, as difficulty's going to come, hardship's going to come, heavy laden's going to come, spiritual depletion is going to come, but it's a fact of turning to Him and not trying to do it ourselves. So as you go through the rest of the day, rest of the week, just think about those things and just remember, He calls us, come to Him, all who labor and are heavy laden, and we will receive the rest that He has for us. And so just take those things and just think about them, reflect on them, and again, have a great day. Till next time, I'm out. Maybe.